Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's absolutely wonderful to have you all here in this amazing set of spaces. It's the best attended in-person event we have ever run. It's broken all the previous records. So we have people here in the Frankopan Hall, here in the Elena Hall, and around the world, and it's lovely to have you all with us. My name is Julian Huppert. I'm the director of the Intellectual Forum here at Jesus College, and it is an absolutely immense pleasure to be able to host this fantastic event here tonight. So first, just say a bit about Jesus College. So I know some of you may be new to Jesus, the college, not the deity. You may be new to that as well. We were originally set up as a nunnery in 1144 on the outskirts of the tiny little town of Cambridge. This is well before Cambridge became a city. So for hundreds of years, this was a nunnery. It predates the university. In 1496, the Bishop of Ely came to see how things were going. And apparently, as he reported, there were two nuns left. One of them was rather elderly, and the other was of ill fame. No idea what that means. But so he kicked them out and turned it to an all-male college, something we fixed a number of decades ago. So we've been a college since 1496. We've had many, many amazing people here. I'd like to say many of them involved with cycling, but I'm not sure I have that many stories to say about cycling. We do about chemistry and theology and poetry and all sorts of other things. Please do take the opportunity while you're here to explore the grounds a bit. We still have in the cloister court, which was built in the 12th century, and our chapel was the original 12th century nunnery church. And it's quite amazing to go to a place where people have been singing and praying and thinking for 880 years. I certainly find that quite amazing. This space and the Intellectual Forum is rather more contemporary. We were set up 10 years or so ago to try to get people to think and talk about some of the big issues of our time. And we've done many, many things. You can have a look on YouTube, Jesus College, Cambridge. You'll see lots and lots of events, everything from helping torture survivors in Russia to AI to where we get our swear terms from and why we do swear in those particular ways, and much, much, much more. So please do have a look at those. I'm particularly excited tonight because we're going to be hearing from somebody I've known and worked with for a very, very long time. I now work here at Jesus, obviously. My past was as a politician. I've mostly recovered. But I used to be the Member of Parliament here in Cambridge and chaired the all-party parliamentary cycling group. So from 2010 onwards, I spent a long time campaigning for cycling and all forms of active transport. And when you do these things, you meet a whole range of interesting and amazing people. But none are really as exciting and amazing as our guest tonight. We'll hear a lot more about some of the amazing things that Chris has done in a minute. But I'm really delighted that we're having such a wonderful audience to hear him, partly because this is also almost the end of his 3 years as a visiting fellow here at Jesus College, so it feels like a nice end. So as I said, in a minute we'll invite him in, and then he and I will have a bit of a conversation, and then it's over to you. So will you join me in welcoming the fantastic Chris Boardman?
I was quite tempted to just not come in then.
Yeah, that would have been slightly embarrassing for us, but thank you for being here. So it's really wonderful to have you here. Let me just get the questions ready that I had prepared. Because you've done so many things, we're going to talk about a range of them. But just for those, I assume you all do know about Chris, but 92 Pursuit Gold, I think everyone remembers that in Barcelona. And it got you free chips, as I recall. Is that right?
Oh, that's a whole story. Yeah, it was back in the days when we didn't win things. It was just about in colour, wasn't it? And the whole experience. I'd seen people jumping up and down, and as a kid, really, early 20s, I thought I quite fancy that, and never thought it was going to happen because I think I mentioned it to somebody this evening. I'm academically barren. I didn't go back to school to pick up exam results. I had didn't have a great time at school, and somehow I'd followed this path of doing this thing, and we ended up in Barcelona. And it was in the days when we didn't win stuff, we turned up and clapped. That was our role at major sporting events. And so to find myself in a final was quite a shocking experience, and I'm not sure we've got time for those particular stories, but on the other side of it, it was It was more a sense of shock. So the whole jumping up and down thing didn't really happen. It was do the thing, oh, it's done. After years, it was done. After the games where you live in a bubble, I came back to where I lived, small town of Hoylake on the Wirral Peninsula, and people were everywhere, and the street was crowded with people, and I didn't like it at all, because this was my place where I live, and it's full of I can't turn it off. And I was in a small terrace house where I lived, and in the evening everybody had gone, everybody had disappeared. I didn't know you were going to ask me about this one. Everybody had gone, and I came outside and it was quiet, and I walked down to the end of the road to the chippy, and has anybody seen Ocean's 11? It was like the fountain scene, but in a very Liverpool-y way. And I went to the chippy, and Ming, the guy who runs it, was there, and he went, "Hi." And I went, "Chips, please." Okay. He comes back a few minutes later, puts the chips on the counter and goes, "It's okay." And that was the moment I knew I'd made it. Super high standards in the Dolphin. But only one medal, one chips, very high standards in the Dolphin.
So there were lots of other palmares. I mean, world time trial champion, world hour record 3 times, I think you kept. Was it 3?
Something like that, yeah.
So, and I still remember seeing that amazing video of you doing on an old style bike.
Yeah, the Eddie Merckx one of them. That was the last thing I ever did, actually, yeah. And that was the last that we thought we'd finish with a world record. And the guy I used to work with, Peter Keane, who was a coach, mentor, partner, he said, "It's not going to be easy, this." And for some reason, I hadn't really seen this one coming. It was going to be horrendously horrible. And after 20 minutes, I thought, I don't think I'm going to make it. So people don't know, it's the distance covered in the hour is the record. And we thought it'd be a nice way to finish, having done technology and Lotus bikes all the way through, that the last thing I do is round tubing bike, spoked wheels, normal clothes. So the difference between me and Merckx or anybody else in the future who wants to do it will just be the person. So it seemed quite a poetic way to finish. It's quite perverse, actually. It was horrendously a painful way to finish a career. After 20 minutes, I thought, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And I'd got a lap in advance, but I knew that essentially your engine gets smaller all the time. Your muscle fibers are breaking down, so the demand to go the speed stays the same, but your engine is shrinking. So I knew I was a lap ahead, but I wasn't a lap ahead, and then I started to lose it, and just managed to, I think I beat it by 10 metres. So it's less than 1 second after the distance, and it was absolutely horrible, and I couldn't walk. Yeah, it was a really stupid thing to do. But if it had gone the other way, it would have been, "Thanks for coming."
It's not 10 metres the right way, is it?
That's the end of it, yeah.
So, and of course, we should talk about the Tour de France. 3 prologues, more yellow jerseys than Lance Armstrong, I think.
Oh, I think I'd say, you've got more.
I've got the same number, I think, yeah.
Yeah, Tour de France, I mean, that's the most perverse, talking about perverse sporting event on the planet, really, isn't it? Where anything where you've got to have a haircut in the middle is just not right as an event that lasts for 3 weeks. But it is a remarkable challenge. It's 8,500 calories a day, so it's physically impossible to eat the amount that you need, even though you're eating all the way through the event. So people go in at 8% body fat and come out 4% body fat. And now, of course, it's been affected by climate change as well. They're now looking at actually we might need to change the calendar to cope, because it has averaged 32, 33 degrees for all of the first 8 stages, and it's unprecedented. Yesterday's stage had to be shortened. Yeah. And so, nothing escapes climate change.
So then after you had done your awful hour, or whatever, however you want to think of it, there's Boardman bikes, which we could pick up on later. But then also, and I think the bit I really want to pick up on is sort of how we met was through campaigning for travel. So British Cycling, Greater Manchester Transport Commissioner, now active Travel England Commissioner. It's been an amazing transition to get into those roles.
It's remarkable to me how all of the challenges, in the simplest terms, the solutions and the problems are all the same. from the sporting world to transport to sport, they're all the same because they're all involved. They're all about basic human beings not being able to get out of their own way. And so I found that solutions that worked with athletes worked with counsellors, and I think that was, I mean, it's the reason for the name for the talk, actually. There's problems, prizes and pathways. It's just a simple way to break it down. Maybe we'll double back to that at the end and say the why.
You know, we may spend a whole time going through all the things that you've done. So, because there's also the, you know, the commentating, and I think a lot of people know you best through some of the work you've done there. You were saying you didn't have much academic prowess. Remind me what your nickname was.
None. The Professor.
So just to be clear here, you know.
Well, I mean, I briefly mentioned a few moments ago Peter Keane, who was a sports scientist, and I was very fortunate to bump into him when I was young. Peter, well, I won't dwell on it, but I didn't have a great time at school. Was bullied, had low self-esteem, and I found something in sport that belonged to me, or specifically riding against the clock, because I owned that and I could change it and I could come back and make it better. And then I started to beat other people, and that was, for somebody who'd had it impressed upon him how ordinary and you weren't good at things, that was quite a big deal. And then, but that ended up being quite an emotional roller coaster, to the point where losing was horrible, to the point where I just nearly walked away because I couldn't cope with the downsides. And you're always going to lose more than you win. And I was lucky that I just scraped onto the junior team. And if you recall, I said we turned up and clapped. We didn't win anything, and I was right in the butt. You know, it was a great way to meet girls and things like that. So it was interesting to me. It was where my friends were. Just about kept me interested. And we bumped into, we'd started to do physiology testing because the rest of the world didn't really know why, just that everyone else seemed to be doing it. And I went to Chichester University and met Peter Keane, and he wasn't much older than me, and he was a young sort of fresh-faced sports scientist, and in the car park meeting me in his personal white lab coat, and he had no interest in winning things. He was just fascinated by how things worked, why they worked, and he'd have an idea for how we could make that better. And to cut that long story short, it was the start of what would be a 15-year working relationship. But he gave me this fascination with being better rather than being the best, which is, it might be pedantic, but it's incredibly important that we could be discussing a single training session or an entire year's strategy. It was always here's an evidence-based idea for how you can be better at this thing. And then I'd commit because I could say, well, I believe that's the case, that is believable. And then we'd go and do it and then pull it apart. What happened? What caused the gap? Wow, we didn't expect that. What do we need to do differently? And off we go again. So it's something probably in academia, it's a very standard learning curve, but I didn't have that framework. And it was, more importantly than the learning, it was a way to deal with failure, way to deal with emotions. I was became interested in the journey rather than the destination, if you like. How do we get better? How do we get better? And we like to measure everything because we found out things that we didn't know. And so I used to talk about that all the time. And that's why people used to go, oh, the professor. I don't think it was said with anything without an eye roll ever. But yeah, I was just obsessed with numbers and how things work. And I just assumed everybody else would be obsessed. And they really weren't.
But it has flowed through. I mean, you know, so much of British cycling success has been based on that sort of work that you led.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was so lucky to be involved at a time. So first of all, we had no money, and people were in charge of things by virtue of the fact that they could take time off work. So it was, you know, the amateur days. And then somebody came along and turned on lottery funding in the mid-90s and went, great, lots of money. Shit, what do we do with it? And nobody knew. And then I was part of that bit where we worked it out. So Peter Keane and I, we didn't have mountains to climb, so we used a treadmill and did hour-long climbing sessions in a local sports centre. So we found a way to do things, and it was a brilliant time to be around. And then post riding bikes around in circles for a living, and I went onto the other side of the fence. Stayed fascinated, and we ended up in a wind tunnel. And I had a small experience with Lotus back in the early 90s when they wanted me to get involved with their bike. and we'd found, well, there's two things happened. One was, there was a guy called Richard Hill, who was an aerodynamicist, and Rudy Toman, who was a test drive for Lotus. So it was Rudy's passion to get me involved and get a bike, one of their bikes to the Olympics, because he was the cyclist. Richard Hill knew absolutely nothing about it, but it was a fairly interesting puzzle, because 90% of the energy a cyclist uses is pushing air out the way. So he got us down to a wind tunnel, Myra, just outside Birmingham, and it was really made for doing trucks. So it was like measuring peas on bathroom scales. It was really crude. And he said, can you ride in this position? Can you do this? And Rudy Toman said, you can't ask him to do that. And Richard said, why not? Because his ignorance was the superpower. And it was a really early lesson that ignorance is a marvelous thing. Never ask an expert to innovate, because they know what you can't do. And we were so constrained by history and what we knew to be true and what was correct that we couldn't see any further. So years later, when we ended up going to Southampton University, where the Secret Squirrel Club was based, the R&D branch of British Cycling in its formative years. And I was head of R&D, but it started out of Chris is in charge of stuff. So it was, you know, helmets and bikes, and go and look at that stuff. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to get the answers that I've had for 15 years. And I'd forgotten that wind tunnels don't tell you the answer. They just say better, worse. And when you expect a thing to happen and you measure it, and then it doesn't tell you what changed, and it was fascinating. So very briefly, we had somebody from the motorsports world who knew about aerodynamics, knew nothing about cycling. We had Sally Cowan from the underwear industry who knew about textiles, knew nothing about cycling. We had a guy called Dimitris Katsanis who knew a little bit about cycling. He made bulletproof seats for helicopters, so he knew about composites. So this whole team, little experts in their field, very different people, didn't know much or anything at all about cycling, then started to say, why are your handlebars 42 centimetres wide? We don't know. Would you use 38 centimetre handlebars? Would we use, yeah, we'll do that, yeah. Would you use 28 centimetres? No, we can't do that. Why? We don't know. And they asked a wholly different set of questions. And we had this machine that would tell us better or worse. This is going to get quite long now, the story, because I'm afraid it has to. So we started to find out things, and one of them was on our clothing. This was the biggest breakthrough that people didn't know about until after we'd started winning lots of stuff. The aerodynamicist looked at us and went, well, you're just a collection of tubes, and we can't change the shape, which I would want to do. Therefore, we've just got to manage it. So seams, let's get the seam and just put it in the right place, and it will trip up the airflow and it will stick on longer, and that will be better. So we did that with clothing, because you're 80% of the frontal area. And we dropped the drag by an average of 7% for the whole team. Some people it was up to 11%. So we were taking people from fifths to firsts with seams. and we thought, that's amazing. And he went, no, actually, that's been known to us for about 100 years. from when we worked with biplanes, which were doing about 60 kilometres an hour and covered in material. And so this is, an old black and white book he brought along and said, yeah, that's really obvious stuff. But we'd never looked outside. So we thought we're going to have to keep this information tight. We have to keep it to ourselves. That's why we became called the Secret Squirrel Club. And the first Olympic cycle, I nearly screwed it all up. That we did all these experiments, just a couple of athletes helped. Took everything to all the equipment and clothing we made just in time for the Olympic team who were trying to qualify. And I said, there you go, there's equipment, clothing, it's going to make you go faster. Here's the evidence to say that it's better. And at the qualifying event, I went and sat in the stand, and they're all really stressed because we hadn't even got to the Olympics yet, we hadn't even qualified. So they're really stressed, athletes and coaches. I'd given them everything they needed to be the best. Went and sat in the stands. It was in Appledorn, I think was this session, and I watched 80% of the athletes carry on doing everything they were doing before. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. We'd given you the recipe to win gold medals. It's worth lingering on this because it's relevant to transport, which we'll come on to in a second, yes. And so I couldn't believe it, and I watched, there was 20% of the athletes had done everything that we wanted them to do. And they were the ones who'd helped with the experiments. So the penny dropped that in my arrogance and ignorance, I'd completely missed the fact that these people had spent blood, sweat and tears to make the best choices they could. And then this kid come along at the last minute and said, don't do it that way, do it this way. And when they were stressed, they wanted to stay with what they knew. Change was really quite scary, so I'll just stick with what I know. So we rushed back to Southampton, we cut a hole in the ceiling, put an overhead projector there, got live data from the wind tunnel, and we got the entire Olympic team down and put them in one by one. And the data was in whatever language they chose. It was newtons of force or time saved in my event or whatever they wanted. And then we didn't say a word. We just let them explore and play. And then they turned around and started to ask, what do you think I should do? And then the experts were on hand and say, well, you could try this. And then they watched the consequences of those choices. And then they started to ask for suggestions, and then we handed them the clothing and the helmets, and pretty much the whole Olympic team shifted over the space of 2 weeks, about an hour and a half per athlete. And the massive life lesson for me was the result does not belong to me. The outcome does not belong to me. My job, I win by giving you the best options and by asking good questions, but what happens next, including the status quo, is entirely up to you. And that was a massive life lesson. And then I could win, because whether they performed or not is not my job. My job is to give you choices.
So, it's an amazing story, and I think the lessons there are fantastic. And as you say, it nicely leads us on to what I wanted to talk about next, almost as though we'd scripted this.
We really haven't.
Which is about the leadership roles you've had in Greater Manchester and now nationally. And how you have gone about the job of being Transport Commissioner, Travel England Commissioner, based on all of these lessons. Because I think there is a lesson. I've been involved with cycle campaigning for a long time, and I'm sure nobody in any of these rooms would ever have done this. There's a temptation to say, this is the right answer, why won't the council do the right thing? You've taken a different approach.
Yeah, we did. I mean, the Olympic Games got a lot of visibility, and I ended up on Newsnight at the same time as the Greek financial crisis. And I thought, I wouldn't mind having a go at that, but I didn't have a tie, so they wouldn't let me comment on it. So they got me in the studio to talk about the results of 2012, and then they started asking me things about general cycling and shouldn't people pay road tax, and I thought, they abolished that in 1912 or whatever it was, and I was getting quite annoyed because this was just a brilliant thing that answers a lot of our problems, and I realised how many, and I started to get really passionate about it, and that was my introduction to campaigning world, which I did using British Cycling gave me a platform to go and sit on the breakfast sofa, and ITV, working for ITV, have given me something of an ability to shape some words and boil it down to a pithy sentence that would stick. So I ended up getting into that, and then Andy Burnham had seen it, and he'd just become the new Metro Mayor in Greater Manchester, and he phoned me up and said, would you come, I've made a commitment to get 10% of trips cycled, or would you come work for me? So I called the guy who was in charge of London for Boris and said, what do we need? He said, you must have control of the cash, and it must be his mission, not yours, or you will fail because it's too hard, it's culture change. So it's got to be from the top. So I called Andy back and said, I've got to have control of the cash, and it's got to be your mission, not mine. And without hesitation, he went, yep. And then I thought, oh shit. And that was 5 years of my life gone because I was stuck. But when I went there, I thought, right, well, the outcome here doesn't belong to me, it belongs to these people. So what is the baseline of same as cycling? Where are you now? And I went and mapped what it costs for that city region to travel as it was. It was £3.75 billion a year. They were paying over £2 million a week treating inactivity-related illness alone. 800 million on collisions, etc. So we'd worked out what the problem was. This was the problem, and that gets people's attention. They had 250 million car journeys a year of less than 1 kilometre. And people don't do that for fun. They do that because I do not have a viable alternative, and that was the normal. So that got everybody's attention and said, listen, if you can live with that and you can afford it, fine. But would you consider something different? Look at these things, look how much you could gain from just changing some small local stuff. And they said, yeah, we'll do that. So we said, right, you organise groups in your 10 different boroughs. You choose who's in the room, entirely up to you. We didn't have a wind tunnel, sadly. So we had a map, a blank map of the area and some coloured pens. They held the pens. So we went round each of the districts and said, would you ride a bike outside your house? And generally the lead councillor for transport would sort of start with like this and say, this is a trick question. Yes, I would. Okay, would you ride to the shops? No. Why not? Because at the end of my road, and there would generally be a busy road or a railway line or some kind of obstacle. What's on the other side? Would you ride there if we just dropped you there? Yeah, do that. Okay. Well, where are the shops? Just draw that on this map. Where are the schools? And what would you need to get across that barrier at the bottom of your road? What would have to be true? There would have to be a crossing or a bridge. Often simple stuff. And over the course of, not coincidentally, about an hour and a half, they drew a map of their area, and then they did that in 10, the same story, 10 different districts. They drew it, and after about an hour and a half, you could see them going, geez, this is possible. So we said, can I take that, aggregate it, and put it online for anybody to make any comment they would? And to their credit, they said, yeah. And it was 1,000 miles, it totted up to 1,000 miles. So this is starting to look quite exciting and slightly scary for them. But they said, okay, and they put it online. And we had just over 4,500 comments in a few hours. And everybody had gone on the map and they'd zoomed in on where they'd lived and they'd gone, where's our bit? And they left comments saying, where's our bit? We've been left out. And so it went from a 1,000 mile network to 1,800 miles. And our biggest complaint was, where's ours? And we never touched a pen. And that was the most important bit, because anybody at any point in that chain could have done nothing at all. So once we got to that point, this is the answer to the actual question that you asked me about 3/4 of an hour ago. We said, right, okay, well, what needs to be true for that to happen? What needs to be true? It's got to feel safe. And we needed to find a proxy that people could relate to. So for anything to do with walking or wheeling, it must pass the double buggy test. A parent with a double buggy could use it and would want to use it. And and then emotionally everybody went, yeah, I'd stand up for that. And then we said, and this is what that means for the junctions and for clearing of the pavements and parking and bins. And they went, oh, okay, yeah, I'm up for that. Because emotionally they decided and could see that is an outcome that I want. And actually, I'd have a fight for that. And then for the cycling infrastructure, it must be usable by a 12-year-old. I think we said a competent 12-year-old. And their parents would let them. So everybody goes, yes, that's him. Because if they can do it, then so can somebody who's a bit frail. So can somebody who's got kids in tow. So they were the two defining statements that then drove the statements that have now become LTN 120 or something. But it means the junctions get done. The junctions are more important than the paths themselves. All of those bits. And there is now enough of that network in place that between 22 and 24, so it happened really quickly, there is a 58% increase in people riding bikes. There is a 23% increase in people walking. And importantly for all the other transport, 72% of people said it helps me connect to other modes. So you've created a customer base for all of your other investment into trams and trains and buses. And now you've just got a Prime Minister who's essentially made that front and centre of the B network in his route into number 10. And if you look at his little yellow badge that he wears, you'll see the B, and you'll see the B's got little handlebars for antenna.
So the handlebars are your little addition.
The whole B was, we did the B. It started out, I think I can tell this story. The first launch that we did, if you found it on the internet, was for B lines. Because we thought B, Greater Manchester, it's a very strong symbol for the region, particularly the city. B's Greater Manchester. B line's quickest way from A to B. There was one called Jenny Wiles, who used to work for Living Streets, was working with us, who thought that one up. And I thought, oh, B lines, that's fantastic. And it also stands for Burnham as well, you know, B lines. So it's like Boris Bike Stuck, even though they were Ken Livingstone, because it just better alliteration. So I thought we'll have that. And we did this first launch of the network, and you know, Andy came along and we did all the pictures. And then somebody called me and went, excuse me, I own the copyright for that. And they have an app, a little directional app that you can stick on your handlebars. And the way copyright works, you bundle together several categories. I think my name is with leather goods and Christmas decorations, weirdly, category 43. So it's a weird thing. And I said, Andy, can we buy it? And he said, I can't spend public money buying a brand. And so it became the B Network. So we had to morph it into the B Network. I have texted him to say, can we buy that brand?
So I was going to finish by asking about Andy Burnham, who may have a new job coming up now that he's switched. But just before we do, we've also just had the latest CWIS, the cycling and walking investment strategy, a third of them, which was £4.5 billion, is that right?
It is 4.5 billion, yeah.
Which is quite a lot of money by anybody's stretch. More than the brand.
It's a reasonable wedge. It's to get 5.3 million more people active. And I think the theme that's possibly coming out here, apart from control, needs to be with the person who's going to own the results, good or bad, is the how you talk about things is everything. And so CWIS was built around that. We have to think very carefully about how I word this one. So how it was built, the cycle and walk investment strategy, it sounds quite geeky, it is. It's the only statutory instrument. So every year you have to report back to Parliament of this is what I said I would do, this is how I'm doing. And it was actually built for central funding. It was built for when government, Westminster had all the money and it gave it out. And then we had devolution. So we had a whole new government, really excited, keen to do things, but still finding its feet. So I went around all of these new metro mayors. It was the M10 a few years ago. Now, last year it was 14. Now they're up to 16, I think. So combining these city regions to be able to do things at a regional scale. So I went around all of them and said, what are you doing around schools? Because the noise goes down for creating anything around children. So if you're talking about children's independence, do you want to give the children in your area the independence and the freedom to stay at after school clubs? Hell yes. What would you need for that? A safe school network. So not an acronym, not LTN, not something that you can be taught to hate, but safe school or child safe zones, if you like. So we looked at their plans and said, what else would you like to do? You know, what's your ambition? Okay, take that. And we took everybody else's and put it together, and it amounted to a 3,500 mile safe school network. So I took that back to my boss, Heidi Alexander, and said, there you go, devolution in action, locally designed national plan. And you essentially allocated the cash to them. So we have to back them with a bit more. They might need some legislation, but it is essentially we clap. And we were the first little body, I think, to think about how you're going to leverage devolution so you don't have 16 different ways of doing things. Get them all together. And that was every mayor from every political spectrum. That was Reform, that was Conservative, it was Labour, it was the full spectrum had all signed for this thing. And that gave people the confidence to back it. So that is central to CWIS. And one of the meetings I was having with your mayor, Paul Bristow, this morning on exactly that. So how do we now make that real? So it's quite cool. And just to finish on the language point, when we first had a target of 50% all journeys cycled or walked, I remember thinking, yeah, but what does 50% mean? So this time around, it's 55% 2035. And I said, what does that mean? And the team went, it's 5.2 million more people active. And I said, yeah, what does that mean? And they went, oh. They went away and came back and said it is 4 million fewer sick days. It is 1.7 million fewer GP visits. So nearly 2 million GP visits are freed up. It's 2,500 lives saved. It's worth 153 billion to the economy. So we now had some language for every audience that we needed to speak to. And so, yeah, I think it's pretty cool. And it's also a cross-departmental strategy, which is a first. And I have put the Metro Mayors onto my board. And no one's done that yet either. So the local people, the regional people, are now deciding what national policy is and what they need to be able to deliver it. So it's been good fun.
Hugely exciting, and I love the way throughout. I think the thread is about transferring from one thing to another. You know, from winds, tunnels to cycling.
Yeah, people say the word career, and I've never had a career. I've just bumped into interesting stuff and been slightly, overconfident and said, "Can I do that?" And people go, "Oh, okay." And so I've just followed it and ended up in a completely different place.
But it's huge, and there's your career, or avoiding bumping into the wrong things as you go. But there's
fell off a lot when I was a bike rider. I'm not sure that counts.
But there is also that idea of finding the way to sell it, and I think you've done. I think this is the third event you've done with us.
Yeah, I think so.
And so the others are on YouTube, and where we went into more detail on some of the different aspects of it. But I think that thing about finding the right way to tell somebody, it's not we should have cycle facilities because as a fit 30-year-old mammal, I would like to be able to cycle really fast on it. That persuades some, but not others. There is that really powerful message of, actually, this is the way to save money on the NHS. That is the way to save money on all these other things. That is the economically sensible thing to do. And I think that's a message which isn't used as often as it should be.
Well, I think the authenticity about it, I mean, it's just a wonderful topic, isn't it? Because it is a sport, and it is transport. It is a way to get independence as a child and to go and meet girls, and there can be a job for a few people, or it's a way to get to work, to get a loaf of bread, to go and get some headspace. You know, you can't football to school. It is such an unusual thing that we have, and it can authentically speak to pretty much every crisis that we face. And so if I've got any inner anger, it's my inability to sell it strongly enough. The fact that I have to try and make the case at all when we should be clearing everything out of the way. But that becomes the fascinating puzzle is, wow, this is really bleeding obvious. So why aren't we doing it? I'm talking the wrong language. So start from the other person's shoes. What do they care about? Everything now has got to be from the household. I don't mind saying we did some focus group work 2 years ago. We threw everything at them that we were talking about to try and understand this. And we said, we want to put active travelling and we want to put the joy back into journeys. Absolutely hated it. Then we said, this is worth, we thought at the time, 53 billion to the economy, and that actively pissed them off. They said, I don't believe you, I don't know what that number means, and I'm just trying to pay my mortgage. And then we started to talk about children and giving your kids the independence to travel under their own steam, to stay at school, and they actively leaned in and electively told us what they would give up to have that. And then we thought, right, it's got to be child-focused. It is visceral. Even if you don't have kids, it is hardwired into us. And then we start to look at, people need to save money right now. We have a no-cost form of transport, a very low-cost form of transport. So that's what we need to be talking about, what you care about, not what I care about. The health thing, don't talk about it. It's a spin-off benefit, if you like. You can talk about not having to pay to go to a gym, that has some benefit, but what is it that people care about? What are they instinctively drawn to? Speak to that, and we can.
And having said that it should be about what you care about, not what I care about, I really ought to take some questions from everyone else in the audience. Thank you. So if you are here, please do put your hand up, and one of the stewards will come to you. If you're in the Lena Hall, please also put your hand up, and I'll be told and we will come to you. And if you're online, I will be able to get things from the Q&A feature here. Before we take the questions, I found it absolutely fascinating, so there's lots more I could have talked about. But we just do a quick thanks halfway through for Chris so far.
Does that mean they have to do half at the end?
They have to do the other half at the end. Yeah, of course. So do we have any questions? If we could start off with one here. Yeah, but the people around the world and in the other hall will not be able to hear you.
They may not understand me anyway, but let me go through my question here. One of the scenes you had up there was obviously a delivery cyclist going across a road with other pedestrians there. Now, that doesn't show me significant respect for the other users of the road. That, and I've been in London, I've been in Southampton, I've been in Gloucester, and some of the cyclists, and I'm sure other people may feel this as well, they just have no regard for the other public users, other road users. And is that not significant also?
Yeah, and I think you've got, I think that's a very valid point. You're quite correct. I see exactly the same thing you do. Cyclists are not a species, they're people, and they will be good, bad, obnoxious, unpleasant, exactly the same as anybody else. And I think what I would say at the moment is, what a great problem to have to start with, that we have, it is a problem. The only thing I would say about sorting it is, if you've got a limited resource, I will start with who does the most harm and work backwards. And that's certainly not to dismiss it, because it is a problem, and London in particular, because you have such density that behaviour. So I would say, right, who does the most harm, work backwards. But you start from the premise that everybody should obey the rules of the road, and everybody should have respect for other people. Absolutely.
Right. There's a question at the back. We're talking about how we should hear from children. I think there's one towards the back.
So you were saying that lots and lots of lives were being saved. Like, I heard a few million. I would like to know what exactly you meant. Like, was it from people not getting into car accidents, or what exactly was killing these lives?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that very well.
So I think the question, you said lives would be saved as a result of the CWIS.
Yes.
How are the lives saved? Is it not having accidents? Is it other effects?
There's all sorts of government frameworks that we have to process data through. So if you can move people, so from inactive to active, so from nothing to something, if you can actually, I mean, inactivity is it's the biggest killer. It's actually 1 in 6 deaths now is related to inactivity. It's slightly more than smoking now. So it's quite big. So you can now demonstrate that if I take away some of that disease and that illness, that's how you, 2,500 early deaths, I think is the exact term. So yeah, it's a number crunching exercise to be able to boil it down to a single statement, so we can all absorb it in the attention span that we have.
Question at the front row.
Thank you. Hi. We've obviously got lots of things in place this year. We've seen a new road safety strategy. We've got CWIS 3, as you've talked about. The pavement parking consultation outcome was released. And as we know, and you've mentioned, we are going to be getting a new Prime Minister. What sorts of things would you love to put in front of a new Prime Minister in terms of short-term change and maybe some of those longer-term things that we'd like to speed up, perhaps? What would be top of your wish list?
Well, I think you should leave that with Claire, because Claire should say what she does for a living. The B network.
I work in Greater Manchester. So, love to know what Chris thinks.
So I took on the onerous task of actually having to deliver this network now. So because it's not all sweetness and light, and there's a lot of it is difficult to get done because people focus in on this bit. They don't think big picture. Oh, it's really good for a region. They think about the parking space outside my house. So it's not easy work to get this done. I think the big picture stuff is exactly that, to actually be able to think of it. And I think Andy Burnham coming into number 10, he has a context of understanding that this is not bicycle rides and it is not walking. It is a health bill that each of those regions has to pay. And I can think of a really I know now of a cost-effective way to deal with it. So start to translate those tiny street things into big save the country things. I mean, this is how you save the NHS. You know, you stop people using it. You stop people needing it. Not everybody, I'm being slightly hyperbolic, but it's, you leverage this tool to, we need to decarbonise. When I did that job, I thought I'd experiment for giving the car up for 2 months, just to see if I could live without a car. And I had a 6-kilometre track that got me to a local station. So because of that tiny track, early or late, whatever the weather, that allowed me to say, I'll run this experiment. And then after 2 months, I thought, I'll sell the car. I can always get another one. I went 5 years without a car. And I didn't drive 14,000 miles a year because of that track. There are 8 million households like mine with more than one car. Imagine if they had that option, how much carbon is that saving? You know, the temperatures we've got outside, there's that one sorted. So you've got health that's free, you've got decarbonisation, you've got cost of living. So to start, I think what I want the next Prime Minister to do, and he's better placed than anyone to know that it works, is to see these small things. I mean, the aggregation of marginal gains comes from the world of sport. That's what this is, to aggregate those marginal gains and make it into a big national mission.
Great, we've got lots of questions flooding in. Can I perhaps, we'll test this out, can we get a question from the Elena Hall? Hopefully the team there can hear this. There we are, that's part of the people in the Elena Hall. We can't hear you currently.
I'm not speaking, that's why
Yes.
I've started to
Do
speak
it
now.
by mind.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right, marvellous. One of the enemies of your whole strategy seems to be the weather, in particular the rain, which I would assume is worse in Manchester than it is in Cambridge. What's the solution to the weather? Rain must depress use. So do you have a solution for the rain?
Well,
Are you a rain god?
I think that's asking an awful lot of one person, to be honest. Somebody, I've had that a few times over the years when somebody says, it rains all the time in Manchester. And so I was like, oh, no, it doesn't. So I got online to look at Copenhagen and where there's high levels of cycling, and to look at and actually it rains loads in Manchester. So I have no rebuttal. They were absolutely right. But I think the amount it rains is not as much as you think. I worked out once when I trained as a professional cyclist, and I used to go out virtually daily, but not for the whole day, for a portion of the day. I got wet 6 times a year. When you actually looked at the proportionality of it, it's not always what you think. But one, you've got mudguards and you've got clothes, and the journeys are often very short, and you don't have to ride a bicycle or walk every single day. But what they found in other countries where you have got a high propensity for or high cycle usage is that because we're really lazy, we are instinctively lazy, that is how we're built, save energy. Once you have chosen a way of travelling, whatever that may be, driving a car, riding a bike, you're really reluctant to change it because it's a pain in the arse to have to go, oh, I'll have to get the car out. Where am I going to park the car? And so you stick with it. And they found that when they get really bad weather, I think it was Copenhagen, 60 in the depths of winter, they found 63% of people carried on travelling the same way because this was now my habit and I really can't be bothered breaking it. So weather is a factor, it's not a deciding factor.
While we've got you, you are on the big screen, by the way, in the Elena, so hi. I think there was another question there. Yeah, good to see some waves in response. There was another question, I believe. Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Really interesting talk. I was just wondering, we've got some great examples of cycling cities, like in Holland, in the Netherlands, and maybe even Cambridge, you could say, is a good city. But there are cities in this country which are not so cycling friendly, which have a slightly, maybe it's a mentality problem. Do you think this, I'm not going to name any, but I think you can probably think of some. How can we get them cycling in these cities?
Well, my take would be you don't I mean, that peppered through that talk was the ability, give the other person responsibility, ownership, and it's their choice. And you're amazed how the conversation changes when you go, listen, if you want to keep paying 3.75 billion a year, crack on. Oh no, we don't want to. Okay, well, would you like to? So when people are in control and your product is really quite nice, then you start to talk about, well, how could we get to that thing? But it's a slightly long-winded answer, but it's very important. So Active Travel England, because of the amazing learning I got from Greater Manchester, we realised that when the system is trained to bid for money, and the best bidders get the most money. So I'm going to tell you all the things that you need. I'm going to be really good at filling that. I'm going to get you. And the goal is not to deliver a thing. Well, it should be, but it often isn't. It's about getting the primary to get your money into my account. And that's the reality of it. So we said, right, we're going to introduce capability ratings, not rankings, capability. And it was based on the experience of GM. And we went, right, okay, for our central funding, our national funding, we will, we rated people from 0, or actually they rated themselves from 0 to 4. So 4 being Holland, nobody in this country, no area is 4. 0 is I have absolutely no interest, as the gentleman said, no interest at all. And 1 is I've got some bit of interest. 2 is actually I've started but haven't really got a team and haven't got a network plan. Getting up to 3, I've got a team in place, I'm starting to deliver stuff, I've got a network plan, I'm committed. So we've got a few places that are 3 in this country. So for when a level 0 or a level 1 or level 2 says, right, I want to do this big infrastructure project, I'm going to do this high street, look at this rendering, I'm going to link these schools, we can say, right, well, you haven't got political support yet, you've only got 1 officer doing your designs, it isn't part of a network plan. Don't do that, you're going to fail, and we're going to fail. So instead, we will invest in training you to be able to do that thing. And in the meantime, go and deliver this package of crossings around these schools. People will love you, you're able to do that now. And so we started to reward progress. And in this, just over 2 years, we halved delivery time for schemes of this size, and we upskilled the councils of England by 12% in 2 years. And now that model is being looked at, hopefully across government, certainly in the Department for Transport, because it stops the bidding culture and it rewards, it creates a culture of constant improvement is what I am going to be rewarded for. And then we make that visible, we publish them every year. So the point about what do we do about the cities that are a bit rubbish or they're just car bound and they don't want to do anything about it, that's okay, live with it. And then we have peer pressure, positive peer pressure, because we make that visible and we can see that you are this and you have chosen those things for your community. And then people can decide whether they support that or they don't. That's democracy.
There's a couple of questions from online I'd like to be on. You sort of answered, but there was one from Nicola Brownjohn I was going to go with. Basically talks about, thank you for your inspired work. We need you in Surrey for walking. CWIS has been dictated by the council without listening to households. So council and councils seem to prefer to promote paying for gyms and driving there. What can we do to change this culture? And I think you've sort of answered that.
I think there's a lot of learning on language. Councillors tend not to go and do what is a really hard job. It is the hardest political job of all, because you are in the face of the person who's got an issue and they know you and you are part of their community, and that's really hard. So what do they need to be able to say, I'm going to take your parking space out, or I'm going to make changes to your street? You need them to be able to make a case that is relevant to the person who's upset. And this is where the bit where we talk about our children and the ability to save money. This is the way that we need to frame things, and we've been really bad at it. We start with the intervention. We start with, I'm going to take your car parking space out. What? And then we start to say, oh, it'd be really good, but this person is now already, I've had enough. But if you start with, what do you want? What do you want for this street? And what would that look like? Give them the pen, metaphorically, literally. What do you want? And what would you like more choice? What would that choice look like? And that is a completely different conversation. And people will then do difficult. They'll do quite a degree of difficult once they've decided emotionally that this is where I want to go.
I think I remember you saying a couple of years ago that you got people to draw the sort of street they'd like to live on, and people don't put in cars and traffic. You know, and starting off with what do you want gives a very different picture of
You
what
ever
we
seen a
have now.
car advert that shows you a car being driven in masses of traffic? You know, where we emotionally connect. I mean, there is the lesson. We emotionally connect first. And then we talk about the intervention or the product. And then we don't do that. We just start with, I want to dig your street up.
Speaking of large transport structure, there's a question online. I will come to more questions in Elena or here in a minute, from Brian Nahr, who talks about the East West Rail proposals between Bedford and Cambridge. It's, you know, very expensive programme. And Brian says, for a fraction of the price, they could build an active travel greenway using the old Varsity Rail line. Should Active Travel England be pushing such projects like this? Or is it a choice between large rail infrastructure and
It's not
walking
that binary, is
infrastructure?
it? It isn't that binary. I think we need to create a suite of choices. So 70% of our journeys are less than 5 miles. Not everybody can do those actively, not everybody wants to, but I think a lot of people would like that choice. A third of all our journeys are less than 2 miles. Is it 1 mile or 2 miles? I can't remember. I thought you might know. But they're really short, really hyper-local. And so we can tackle those things, and when somebody goes further, then we give them... When we first talked about the B network, I wanted to start with, we did start with a paragraph. Give me an attractive, viable alternative to driving, choices that I can mix and match depending on what I'm doing for the day, and the price is capped at the end of the day, so I know what. Give me, you know, that is, so I'm obviously really made a mess of that, but we made yes, that's what I'm trying to achieve. And then you can say, right, what needs to be true for that to happen? So I think rail is part of the mix. It's really expensive. Yeah, I mean, the reason I paused is you're right down into procurement and how we do things, and we have found the most expensive way to deliver things, I think, I mean, in the world, maybe, I don't know. And it's a way above my pay grade how we dig ourselves out of that. But I think we've got to, because rail at the moment is, it's a resource we desperately need. I mean, I live a third of the year in the Cairngorms, and I do not want to fly. I probably fly once a year now for holidays, if that, and that's it. So I like trains. I mentioned before, I can get work done. For me to go to Scotland is £170 a day train. If I get the sleeper train, it's £300 one way. To do that return trip to Inverness Airport, I found out the other day, is £40. How can we compete with that? You can't. So the rail network, we really need to get on top of. And it's quite good that you've got an incoming PM that's been grappling with that for several years and understands it and wants to fix it.
So moving from very large infrastructure to small infrastructure, then I'll come back to people in the room. Rob Wilkinson asks, what roles will e-bikes play in UK active transport?
I think e-bikes are a game changer. It's taken us 15 years to sort of go, hang on, aren't these really good? When the rest of Europe's going... I mean, I know that in the Netherlands that it changed their infrastructure to go intra-urban. So they're starting to join up conurbations now because they weren't just a way to connect with local transport hubs, trams, trains and buses. Now I'll actually go that distance because the wind's not a problem in that environment, hills aren't a problem, but it takes away a lot of the fear. And that is a game changer. They're still expensive. They're less than £1,000 for some now. So it's viable. And I think it's one of those things that some nudge theory, we could get even more people to start to use them. We've got some really poor regulation around them at the moment in terms of I mean, I've got on my Instagram feed, I'm watching this message come through that tells me I'll sell you a kit to chip it, so it goes above the legal limit. And that kit is being sold. So we've got a trading standards issue that product that shouldn't be legal is coming into the country, which is part of the fires problem as well. So that's because it's happening really quickly and we're not built to deal with quick. But e-bikes are amazing. I know London, it's not a great example to use London because it's so dense, but line bikes are really expensive. People don't care. And it's got a whole new set of users to use them. When there's a tube strike, the biggest threat to TfL is not the revenue loss, it's actually that people have gone and tried getting around by bike because they have to and go, actually this is quite good, and I can go door to door and just step off and leave it. So you wonder how many people are then not coming back to the tube when they turn them back on. So I think they're a real force for good.
Fantastic. There's some more questions online. Is there anything else in the room here? I thought there might be. Should we take one from up in the gods up there? This is Jesus, so we have to be able to have some gods every now and then.
Have you told that one before?
No, it's completely new, Chris. Completely new.
Hi, yeah, there seems to be a lot of focus on big cities, and I understand that's where a great number of population is. There's a lot of cars on the road that are quite dangerous. But cities also have buses, trams, tubes to get around. I live in a South Cambridgeshire village. The nearest town is 3 miles away. There aren't buses. There's no cycle path. How do children that maybe want to go to the local town get there? Is there any focus on rural communities?
I was asked that question about the focus of funding in front of a Transport Select Committee a couple of years ago, and said, what about rural communities? And we said, well, we're up for it, but it is a political choice. So that safety is, very broadly speaking, the same cost, whether you're doing it in a densely populated urban centre or for a more rural village. So it is a political choice on spend. So I think they aren't exact figures, but I think at the time we said it will cost 12 billion to reach your target of 50% of journeys cycled or walked by focusing on where all the people are, or we can do it for 18 billion and we'll make sure no rural communities left behind. But that's a political choice, and we can do it. We're just about to publish a rural design guide, which there's never been one before, which is one of the tools that local authorities need. I think if I lived in a rural community, and generally what we mean by rural is extra urban. We mean two miles or so, but it's still 2 miles, so it is cyclable. And my son is one of those. He's just got a job as a chemist. I'm getting really good at this meandering thing. There's a lot of power sitting here to be able to take about whatever
going
you
round
want.
and round in circles, you mean?
Oscar, he got a job, his first job as a chemist, and it was only 6 miles away, and he's never had a car, didn't want a car, he's got no money, and 6 miles, and he'd have quite happily got on. We've got two very cheap e-bikes, and he quite happily just gone to work, and he can get so far down the opposite direction on the path I talked about, and then he's got 3 miles of horrid industrial Ellesmere Port roads. So he can't do that. So he can't get the bus. And the bus to do 6 miles was over an hour and a half because he had to go back somewhere else to double back. And I mean, you'll know that, Cambridge, go to London, come back here. And so he has been forced to buy a car. And he doesn't want one. He doesn't want to spend his very limited resource on it. And then you think, how many people like him are there? So in general terms, I'm not sure it's much of a saving for that 16 billion to not do it. So that means we need to refocus, but again, it's above my pay grade, that one. I'd go for it, but.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. Depending how long the questions and answers are, we may or may not be able to get through a lot of them there. There's a question right at the very back there, then I'll come to Elena Hall next. So right at the back there.
Thank you. Very inspiring, Chris. You're an incredible man. I really am pleased to be introduced to the Intellectual Forum. I'm interested in bicycle tours in various cities around the UK, and I probably do more miles on bikes than anybody else. One of the things that strikes me is the network's all very beautiful, and I love the photographs. That's fantastic. That tree is going to put a huge rut when those roots grow across there. And that street, within 5 years, is going to be like a mogul field. When you get to where you want to go, there is nowhere to park your bike. We all have experiences of struggling to park. I've seen a lot of planters. I don't know if you're familiar with planters, bicycle planters, and then you're adding biodiversity. I'm just wondering if you're familiar with any of that, and that it's a bit too, you're a bit high level for that, but I wonder if you're...
Oh no, I like getting down in the weeds.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm not quite sure what the actual question was. I'm not familiar with the... I mean, are you talking about the infrastructure standing up to trees and the like? Yeah, okay.
I think there's partly something about building and then the maintenance and how
Yeah,
these would
exactly.
evolve over time.
It was
Okay.
great work putting it in. What are we looking at in maintenance? And any thought at all to parking after the network's been put in?
Maintenance, so I'm going to focus on that bit. I think I'm really interested in maintenance, particularly, God, I'm just a complete geek. Maintenance funding in particular, because at the moment it's this little world that is detached, and we have our budget and our job is to spend maintaining things, and that's it. And it is quite disconnected when you think, actually, that is an ongoing fund forever, that you could say, actually, I'm going to use that much more strategically or tactically, and I'm going to start using it to upgrade as I go forever. And I think that's a really fascinating prospect. And the carrot there could be, we're going to increase the maintenance fund. But when you maintain, you're not going to replace crap stuff that doesn't work. You're going to upgrade. You're going to do that bit better. You're going to do it better. It doesn't directly address the foliage intro there, but I think the maintenance one is a real, because at the moment we are looking for cash everywhere. Everybody can tell you there's lots of strategies. Spend with me and I will save you money. You know, it's always the jam tomorrow. So we need to be really smart, I think. If we're going to spend money on this, we have to be able to identify what we're not going to spend it on. Or why does, if I spend that same money this way, I will get 3 times return, but I have to spend it anyway. And I think that's where we've got to be smart now. And I think we can do that. When I went to work in GM, we didn't actually have a cycling budget. We had an aspiration, and we knew that it would cost about 1.5 billion to build the network, but we hadn't got cash. And so there was a guy I first worked with called Chris Paul, councillor, and he helped me build, actually he led on it, I helped him, build a spreadsheet of 100 different sources of funding, or different ways to fund, from the obvious mayoral precepts to green loans, because actually if all these good things happen, then we could borrow against that. So we found 100 different things, and then government came along and gave us a Transforming Cities Fund, and then we stopped innovating. So there's a lesson in there actually, which I'm not distilled and we can't get into it now, but we stopped being clever because we didn't have to be. So we just went, oh great, we'll use some of this money because it was easier and for everybody involved. But yeah, being clever at the moment when we've got no money is pretty important.
The Nobel laureate Rutherford famously said once, we haven't got any money, so we'll have to think. And there is something about that. And,
I like that. I think I like that one.
Not that I'm against having money either. Yeah. I said we go to Elena Hall, because I think there's a question there.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Look, I think I probably want to raise 3 points, and I hope that they turn out to be related, because I think they are.
As long as they're briefish points, yes.
Okay, you've talked about Holland. You've talked about one of your other contributors from the floor talked about difficulties on the road in terms of the potential conflict between different road users, car users as opposed to cyclists, and so on and so forth. And also someone talked about the practicalities of getting around when it's raining, for example. So just to go back to the Holland thing for a moment, I took my children on a tour of Holland many, many years ago, long before electric bikes had been introduced into the UK. And what we found there was, apart from the delight of cycling on roads specifically built for cyclists and
pedestrians only was that we frequently met elderly people out of an evening for their constitutional, you might call it, but there were constitutionals on bicycles. One of the reasons they were on bicycles was because the electric bicycle enabled an elderly and infirm spouse to accompany a firm, if you like, not infirm spouse.
Sorry, we've only got a couple of minutes. I want to give Chris a chance to answer as well.
On a joint car ride. Now, it's an easy thing to say that we should look at Holland. That's if that's so obvious. But one of the things that the Dutch seem to have right is that everybody seems to use both a bicycle and a car. So there isn't really potentially that conflict between two different road users. They all do understand the contribution in a very crowded country that the bicycle makes and the need to make infrastructural provision for it. Now here, when you look at the infrastructure, it's appalling. Okay.
So I'm afraid we may have to stop there so Chris can actually answer the question.
Okay, my question is...
very, very, very quickly, and then we'll have to move on.
When you've all finished laughing, it's a serious point. It's difficult to conceive of people using a bicycle if they're not cyclists because it's such an alien activity in the UK. I've cycled for 60 years plus and repaired bicycles.
Thank you. I think we'll have to stop there. Chris, there are people who... Is it an alien thing to people in Britain to cycle? How many people do cycle now?
Ooh, gosh, it's a very low percentage. And it varies widely depending on where you are. Obviously, you're about 30-odd%, I think, here.
But I think how many people are there who cycle at least once a year, for example? Because really that is a much bigger number.
Yes, but I don't know what it is.
So.
I keep a lot of stats in my head. That one I haven't got. But you start to become to the point of is that of use, I think. But it's very, very local, depending on whether it's cultural in a given area. I mean, you've got Peterborough, Cambridge, very different, and how do you translate that? There was one point actually I want to double back to, because the point the gentleman was making earlier about behaviour and mixing and older people. One of the things that Holland has, of course, is presumed liability law. So if anybody on a bike hits somebody walking, they're automatically liable, and for them to prove otherwise. We have a tiny bit of it. If you rear-end somebody on a motorway, then you are at fault, and for you to prove otherwise, you didn't leave enough space. That's quite a civilised law. We've touched on that a few times over the years, but there are consequences for me for poor behaviour. And as we hope we get more people, particularly riding bikes because there's a speed differential, I think we're really going to have to think hard about introducing more consequences. We don't want to put barriers in the way. That's the trade-off. So, you generally go straight to, shall we have registration for cyclists, which I think is only North Korea that does that now. And, the cost of doing it versus the return is it's pointless. But there should be a way to civilise it as the numbers change and how we move around so people treat each other properly. And presumed liability is quite a good one.
And I think it's not just about cyclists and pedestrians. It would be, in general, the most dangerous.
Yeah, it goes all the way up the chain. Those with the higher propensity to do harm carry the burden of responsibility. And I think it's brilliant. And I went with a minister, Robert Goodwill, a few years ago to Copenhagen because I wanted him to experience it. So we're back to problems, prizes and pathways. He could see our problem. We wanted to go and see what the potential prize was. And it was odd because we'd just wait because there was a car indicating right and it wouldn't go. It just wouldn't go until we did. And it was culturally so very different. But the pathway bit wasn't there because we had an experience and he said, this is really embarrassing, isn't it? That we're sitting in a bicycle traffic jam. We could see the prize, but we could not see how we get from where we are to that. And so he went back to his day job and went, anyway, I've got a big pile of stuff, I'll get on, nothing changed. You have to understand the problem, which gets me interested, understand the prize, which motivates me, but it's the pathway that gives belief that it is possible. And without belief, no one will start the journey.
And I think bringing us back to the title of the talk is a brilliantly smooth way to end this, Chris. Thank you very much.
been absolutely wonderful to have you back here, Chris. I still want to have the conversation about your real love of scuba diving, but that will have to be another event next time you come. We will just do an underwater subaquatic one. But it's been great to have you here tonight for these visits, and as a visiting fellow here at Jesus College. I mean, it really is fantastic to have a professor here at Jesus College. And I'm afraid that is all we have time for. There was lots of questions online and in person that we could have looked at. We could have gone on for many hours. But thank you so much for joining us here at Jesus College, at Frankfurt Elena, online, wherever you are. That's it from the Intellectual Forum. And in fact, we don't have anything more, no public events over the summer, but we will be back next year with an incredible range of things. Magic, AI, lots and lots more. So please do come and have a look. Almost all of our events are free to everybody. They're in person and online and on YouTube. So really is no excuse for not coming. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. And again, Chris, thank you so much.